The great crystal dome of Zetra Prime sparkled like a jewel against the purple sky. Inside, hundreds of beings from across the galaxy sat in circles, their voices mixing together in a dozen different languages. The Galactic Consortium's yearly meeting was always loud, always messy, and always full of arguments. Ambassador Keela pulled her blue fur tight around her shoulders and checked her datapad again. The numbers were still there, still wrong, still impossible to explain. For 3 months, her people had been picking up strange signals from the edge of the galaxy, energy patterns that didn't match any known technology, ships moving in ways that broke every law of physics she knew. "Elder Vorthak," she called out, raising her voice above the chatter. "I need to speak with you about the readings from Sector 7. The massive reptilian creature turned his great head toward her. His scales were dark green with age, and his eyes held the wisdom of someone who had lived for over 200 years. Around his neck hung the golden chain of the Saurid Empire, one of the oldest members of the consortium. "Ah, young Kayla," Vorthak's voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Still chasing shadows at the galaxy's edge, I see." Other delegates began to quiet down, sensing an interesting conversation. Kayla felt her ears flatten against her head as dozens of eyes turned toward her. She was the youngest ambassador in the room, representing a species that had only joined the consortium 50 years ago. Most of these beings still saw her as a child. "These aren't shadows," she said, holding up her datapad. "Look at these energy signatures. They're using technology we've never seen before. The ships are huge, bigger than anything in our databases." A chittering laugh came from the insect-like delegate from the hive worlds. "Perhaps your sensors need repair, furry one. There are no unknown civilizations left to discover." "That's just it," Kayla pressed on. "I think these might not be unknown. I think they might be human." The dome went completely silent. Even the background hum of the translation system seemed to pause. Then Elder Vorthak began to laugh. It started as a low rumble in his chest and grew until his whole massive body shook with it. "Humans," he wheezed between laughs. "Oh, child, you have been reading too many old stories." The other delegates joined in the laughter. The bird-like avirans fluffed their feathers with amusement. The rocky lithoids made grinding sounds that passed for chuckling among their kind. Even the usually serious aquatic council was bubbling, with what might have been mirth. "Humans are fairy tales," said Counselor Zephyr from the Cloud Cities. Her gaseous form rippled with colors that showed she found the whole thing funny. "Stories we tell our young ones to make them behave. Be good, or the humans will come with their loud voices and their strange customs." "But the energy patterns," Kayla started, "are probably just solar flares or some natural phenomenon," interrupted Admiral Korath of the War Clans. His forearms gestured dismissively. "Humans never existed, Ambassador. They're myths, legend, fiction." "Think about it logically," added Dr. Synthar, the lead scientist from the academic worlds. His large brain pulsed behind his transparent skull as he spoke. "A species of bipedal mammals who supposedly conquered their entire homeworld through violence and stubbornness? Who could survive in any environment and adapt to any situation? Who bred so fast they spread across dozens of star systems in just a few centuries? It's absurd." "Don't forget the best part," laughed the Hive delegate. "They were supposed to be completely insane, fighting each other constantly but then working together perfectly when facing outside threats. Emotional creatures, who somehow built the most logical technology. It's a contradiction." Kayla looked around the room, feeling her confidence drain away. Maybe they were right. Maybe she had been reading too many old databases, too many ancient stories. Maybe she wanted to discover something new so badly that she was seeing patterns where none existed. But then she noticed something strange. Not all the delegates were laughing. The oldest ones, the representatives from the founding species of the consortium, were sitting very quietly. Their faces showed no humor, no amusement. Instead, they looked worried. The ethereal delegate caught her attention most of all. These beings were pure energy, ancient beyond measure and usually impossible to read. But this one was flickering in a pattern Kayla had never seen before. Its light was dim, and uncertain, pulsing in quick nervous bursts. "Where do the stories come from?" Kayla asked suddenly. The laughter began to die down. "What do you mean?" asked Vorthak, though his voice was no longer quite as amused. "I mean, every species in the consortium has stories about humans. We all have myths and legends about them, but we don't share mythologies about anything else. Why do beings from completely different parts of the galaxy, who never met until we formed the consortium, all have the same stories about the same fictional species?" The dome was quiet again, but this was a different kind of quiet. This was the silence of beings who were suddenly thinking hard about something they had never questioned before. "Coincidence," said Admiral Korath, but his voice was less certain now. "Cultural contamination through trade routes," suggested Dr. Synthar, though his brain was pulsing faster, the way it did when he was worried. "Maybe," said Kayla. "Or maybe the stories exist because they're not stories at all." Elder Vorthak stood up to his full impressive height. His voice carried the authority of age and power. "That's enough. This discussion is over. There are no humans, there never were humans, and there never will be humans. The galaxy is safer without such dangerous fantasies." The formal session ended soon after, but Kayla noticed something interesting. As the delegates filed out of the dome, the oldest ones stayed behind. They gathered in small groups, speaking in whispers that their translation devices couldn't pick up. When younger delegates approached, these conversations stopped immediately. Keela lingered near one of the crystal pillars, pretending to organize her notes while listening. She caught fragments of words in languages so old her translator had trouble with them. Words like awakening and return and the deep places. The ethereal delegate drifted past her, and for just a moment, its energy field touched hers. In that brief contact, she felt something that chilled her to her core. Fear. Ancient deep fear that had been carried for thousands of years. As Kayla finally left the dome and walked through the glowing streets of Zetra Prime, she couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just happened. The laughter of the younger delegates had been too loud, too forced. The silence of the older ones had been too complete. She looked up at the purple sky, where 3 moons hung like pearls against the darkness. Somewhere out there, at the edge of known space, strange ships were moving with impossible technology. Ships that her instruments said were real, even if everyone else said they couldn't be. That night, as she prepared her official report, Kayla made 2 decisions. First, she would file the energy readings exactly as her sensors had recorded them, no matter what anyone said. Second, she would start researching the oldest databases she could find, looking for any mention of humans that wasn't labeled as mythology. Because if the stories were true, if humans had once existed, then the galaxy was about to discover that some legends are more dangerous than anyone imagined. The readings from Sector 7 were getting stronger every day. 3 months after the meeting on Zetra Prime, the mining station Kepler 7 went silent. The station was nothing special, just a collection of metal buildings stuck to the side of a large asteroid in a system nobody cared about. 500 workers from a dozen different species spent their days digging rare metals from the rock. It was boring work, but it paid well, and the asteroid was rich with materials the consortium needed. Captain Drex of the investigation ship Thunder's Edge stared at his scanner readings and scratched his scaled chin. His ship hung in space near the asteroid, along with 4 other vessels from the consortium fleet. Everything looked normal from the outside. The station's lights were on. The mining equipment was still running. The communication dishes were pointed in the right directions, but nobody was answering their calls. "Sir," his communications officer called from across the bridge. "I'm picking up the automated systems. Life support is working. Artificial gravity is stable. Even the coffee makers in the break rooms are running on schedule. But no people, no people." Captain Drex was a practical being. He came from a species that had been exploring space for over 3,000 years, and he had seen strange things before. Empty ships, dead stations, colonies that had simply vanished. Space was dangerous, and sometimes entire populations died, from disease, accidents, or pirate attacks. But this was different. When populations died, they left bodies behind. When pirates attacked, they took valuable things with them. When accidents happened, there was damage to see. Kepler-7 looked like everyone had just left. Take us closer, Drex ordered. Full sensor sweep. I want to know what happened here. As the Thunder's Edge approached the asteroid, more details became clear. The docking bays were empty but not damaged. The mining tunnels were still lit and pressurized. In the central hub, security cameras were still recording. Captain, the sensor officer said, her voice puzzled. I'm reading personal belongings in all the quarters. Clothes, pictures, books, games. Even meals left half-eaten in the dining areas. Any signs of struggle? Weapon discharge? Breach alarms? Nothing. It's like they all just decided to leave at the exact same time, but only took the clothes they were wearing. The boarding party found exactly what the sensors had shown them. Kepler-7 was a ghost station, but a very neat and tidy ghost station. In the quarters, beds were made and personal items were arranged carefully on shelves. In the workshops, tools were cleaned and put away properly. Even the waste recycling systems had been emptied and serviced. Dr. Yanara, the team's xenoarchaeologist, stood in the middle of the main cafeteria and turned slowly in a circle. She was an expert in reading the signs that civilizations left behind, and this scene made no sense to her. Captain Drex, she called through her communicator. You need to see the security footage. In the station's control room, they gathered around the main screen. The footage showed the normal routine of a mining station. Workers eating breakfast, checking schedules, heading to their jobs in the tunnels. Everything looked completely ordinary until 1447 station time on the day the communications stopped. At exactly that moment, every person on the station stopped what they were doing. The miners put down their tools. The cooks turned off their stoves. The administrators saved their work and closed their computers. Children in the daycare center stopped playing with their toys. Even the babies in the nursery stopped crying. All of them looked up at the ceiling with the same expression. Their faces showed wonder, fear, and something that might have been recognition. They stood like that for almost 10 minutes, completely motionless, as if they were listening to something the cameras couldn't record. Then, as if they had all received the same silent signal, they walked calmly toward the shuttle bays. The footage showed them boarding the station's transport ships in perfect order. No pushing, no panic, no confusion. They loaded supplies and personal items as if they were going on a planned trip. Parents carried children. Workers helped the elderly and disabled. Everyone moved with quiet purpose. The last image showed the final shuttle lifting away from the docking bay, leaving Kepler-7 completely empty. This is impossible, Captain Drex said. Mass hallucination? Some kind of mind control? Dr. Yanara wasn't watching the screen anymore. She was studying her scanner, and her face had gone pale. Captain, I'm reading something else. These symbols, carved into the asteroid's surface, they weren't here in the station's original construction reports. They found the carvings on the outer hull of the main habitat, etched deep into the metal in lines that still glowed faintly with residual heat. The symbols were unlike anything in consortium databases, but Dr. Yanara recognized their style from the most ancient ruins scattered across the galaxy. Markings found on dead worlds, in empty cities, on monuments built by civilizations that had vanished before most current species had developed space travel. Can you translate them? Drex asked. I think so. These symbols appear in several extinct languages. They all say the same thing. She paused, checking her readings again. We remember. We return. A chill ran through the boarding party. Those words appeared in the oldest myths and legends of dozens of species. They were supposedly the last message left by the humans before they disappeared from the galaxy, but humans were just stories. Everyone knew that. Sir, the communications officer's voice crackled through their headsets. Long-range sensors are detecting multiple contacts jumping into the system. Big ones, really big ones. Captain Drex and his team rushed back to their ship. On the Thunder's Edge's main screen, they watched as massive shapes emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the system. The ships were enormous, larger than anything in the consortium fleet. Their design was strange and alien, covered in angles and curves that seemed to shift and flow even as they watched. "Are they consortium vessels?" someone asked. "Negative," the sensor officer replied. "No match in our databases. Design is completely unknown." The strange ships hung in space like sleeping giants, their hulls dark except for running lights that pulsed in patterns that seemed almost like a heartbeat. They made no aggressive moves, sent no communications, gave no indication of their intentions, but their presence changed everything. Dr. Yinara stared at the screen, her mind racing through everything she knew about ancient history, extinct civilizations, and impossible legends. The timing was too perfect. The symbols on the asteroid, the mysterious evacuation, and now these ships arriving exactly when the station went silent. "Captain," she said quietly, "I think we need to contact Consortium Command immediately, and I think we need to tell them to start taking those old stories more seriously." "What old stories?" "The ones about the species that supposedly conquered the galaxy once before, the ones that vanished without explanation, the ones that every civilization remembers, even though they're supposed to be myths." Captain Drex looked at the massive ships on his screen, then at the empty asteroid where 500 beings had simply walked away from their lives because something had called to them. Something that had carved ancient symbols into metal and made people abandon everything they knew. "Humans," he whispered. "Maybe," Dr. Yinara said. "Or maybe something worse. Something that's been waiting in the dark between the stars, watching and learning and growing strong." As they prepared to jump to hyperspace and carry their report to Consortium Command, the alien ships began to move. They didn't follow, didn't threaten, didn't even acknowledge the presence of the Thunder's Edge. Instead, they arranged themselves in a formation around the empty asteroid, as if they were standing guard over something precious. The last thing Captain Drex saw before his ship jumped away was more carvings appearing on the asteroid's surface, glowing briefly as if written by invisible hands. Dr. Yinara managed to scan them before they lost visual contact. The new message was shorter than the first, but somehow more terrifying. "We have not forgotten what you did to us." Admiral Thresia stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Eternal Vigilance, and watched the impossible happen. Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out on dozens of worlds as the Consortium's greatest military minds tried to understand what they were seeing. The human fleet hadn't attacked. That was the first surprise. Instead, they had simply appeared. Not just at Kepler 7, but at 17 different systems across Consortium space. Always at the edge of each system, always in perfect formation, always broadcasting the same message, on every frequency known to science. "People of the galaxy," the voice said in flawless translations of every language in Consortium space. The speaker sounded female, calm, and absolutely certain of herself. "We are the sons and daughters of Earth. We have returned to reclaim what was taken from us." Admiral Thresia was old enough to remember the stories her grandmother had told her about the ancient days when the galaxy was younger and more dangerous. Stories about a species of strange bipedal creatures who could adapt to any world, survive any disaster, and unite against any threat. Stories that every sensible being dismissed as mythology. But mythology didn't build ships that could appear in 17 systems at once without using any hyperspace routes the Consortium could detect. Mythology didn't broadcast in languages that had been dead for thousands of years. "Status report," she ordered. Commander Yalk, her second in command, consulted his datapad with shaking hands. 17 fleets, Admiral. Each one has between 50 and 200 ships. The smallest vessels are larger than our biggest dreadnoughts. We're trying to scan their weapons and defensive systems, but our sensors can't penetrate their hulls. It's like they're made of empty space. On the main screen, the nearest human ship dominated the view. It was impossibly huge, easily 10 times the size of the Eternal Vigilance, and covered in what looked like smooth black metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Strange symbols glowed along its hull in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Have they responded to our first contact protocols?" Thresia asked. "Yes, Admiral. They're requesting direct communication with Consortium leadership. They say they're not interested in talking to military commanders. That was the second surprise. Every species the consortium had ever encountered wanted to establish military strength before attempting diplomacy. It was the universal way things were done. You showed your weapons, demonstrated your power, and then negotiated from a position of respect. But the humans seemed to consider the consortium military beneath their notice. "Patch me through to their fleet commander," Thresia ordered. "Full diplomatic protocols." The screen flickered, and suddenly she was looking at something that shouldn't exist. A human face, exactly like the ones described in the old stories. Bipedal, mammalian, with forward-facing eyes and a mouth that could form expressions no other species could make. The being appeared to be female, with short, dark hair and skin the color of desert sand. She wore a uniform of dark blue material with silver markings that might have been rank insignia. "Admiral Thresia of the Consortium Third Fleet," the human said before Thresia could speak. "Born on Kavak Prime 63 years ago. Graduated top of your class from the Naval Academy. Married to Engineer Borthak. 2 children, both serving in the Consortium Civil Service. You collect ancient pottery and grow orchids in your spare time." The bridge went dead silent. Every being present stared at the screen in shock. "How do you know that?" Thresia whispered. "We know many things, Admiral. I am Admiral Chen of the Terran Expeditionary Force. You may consider this our formal introduction to galactic society." "Terran? You mean, you really are human?" "Admiral." Chen's mouth curved upward in what the old stories called a smile, though this one held no warmth. "We are what remains of humanity, yes, though perhaps not the humanity your ancestors remembered." "Our ancestors?" "Admiral Chen, I think there's been some mistake. Humans are, that is, the historical records show. The historical records show whatever the consortium wanted them to show." Chen's voice remained calm, but something dangerous flickered in her eyes. "Tell me, Admiral, what do your oldest archives say about the Terran systems, about Earth and its colonies? About the 37 worlds where humans lived and built and dreamed of a peaceful galaxy?" Thresia felt a cold certainty settling in her stomach. "The archives list those systems as uninhabited. They always have been. Convenient. And what about the billions of humans who supposedly never existed? The cities we built, the art we created, the children we raised, all just imagination?" Thresia found herself unable to speak. The implications were too enormous, too terrible to consider. Admiral Chen leaned forward slightly. "We have demands, Admiral. 3 simple requests that the Consortium Council will fulfill within 1 standard galactic year." "What demands?" "First, the return of all human artifacts, cultural items, and biological samples currently held in consortium museums, research facilities, and private collections. Second, the evacuation of all non-human populations from the 37 star systems that belong to humanity. Third, reparations for what your people call the Great Silence, but which we remember as the Great Murder." The words hit Admiral Thresia like physical blows. "Admiral Chen, I don't understand what you're talking about. There was no great murder. Humans were never, that is, according to our records. According to your records, we never existed. But we remember, Admiral. We remember everything. The attack fleets that came without warning, the orbital bombardments that turned our worlds to glass, the hunting parties that tracked down every human ship, every human colony, every human child who tried to hide in the dark between the stars." Chen stood up, and behind her, Thresia could see other humans working at stations that seemed to be grown from living crystal rather than built from metal. "But some of us survived. Some of us escaped to places your people couldn't find. We've spent 3,000 years growing strong, learning about the galaxy that tried to erase us and preparing for this moment." 3,000 years? Thresia's voice was barely a whisper. "Oh yes, Admiral. We are very patient when we need to be. It's one of those famous human traits your mythology remembers. We don't give up, we don't forgive, and we never forget." The communication channel filled with new voices as other human ships joined the conversation. Dozens of admirals, captains, and commanders all speaking in perfect harmony. "We are the children of Earth, scattered among the stars. We are the inheritors of a murdered civilization. We are the species you tried to erase from history. We are humanity, and we have returned." Admiral Chen raised her hand and the chorus fell silent. "You have 1 year, Admiral Thresia. 1 year to convince the Consortium Council that cooperation is preferable to the alternative. 1 year to return what belongs to us and abandon what you stole from us. And if the Council refuses?" Chen's smile returned, and this time it was even colder than before. "Then you'll discover why the founding members of your consortium were so afraid of humans that they decided genocide was the only solution. You'll learn why we were considered dangerous enough to justify the murder of 30 billion innocent beings. But you're not attacking now. You're talking instead of fighting. That doesn't seem so dangerous." "Admiral," Chen said softly, "the most dangerous thing about humans was never our weapons or our technology. It was our ability to unite every thinking being in the galaxy against a common enemy. It was our talent for making others believe in justice, freedom, and the right of all species to exist without fear." She gestured to something off-screen, and Admiral Thresia's sensors detected new movement throughout the system. Ships were emerging from hyperspace. Not human ships, but vessels from species Thresia didn't recognize. Aliens who had never been part of the consortium, never been contacted by any galactic government. "We've had 3,000 years to make friends, Admiral. To share our story with others who remember what the consortium did during its founding days. Others who have their own reasons to want justice." The screen went dark, leaving Admiral Thresia staring at her own reflection. Around her, the bridge crew stood in stunned silence as the implications sank in. Somewhere in the consortium's most secret archives, hidden beneath layers of classification and misdirection, was the truth about humanity's extinction. And now, that truth was coming back to demand an accounting. The age of legends was over. The age of reckoning had begun. The emergency session of the Consortium Council was unlike anything in the organization's 3,000-year history. Representatives from every member species crowded into the great chamber on Zetra Prime, their voices raised in fear, anger, and confusion. Above them, holographic displays showed the human fleets that now surrounded dozens of key worlds, waiting with patient menace. Ambassador Kayla sat in the junior delegates section, her datapad clutched in her trembling hands. 3 months ago, she had tried to warn them. 3 months ago, they had laughed at her. Now, as she watched the chaos around her, she felt no satisfaction in being right. Only terror at what it might mean. Elder Vorthak called for order, his massive form towering over the assembly. The ancient Sarid looked older than Kayla had ever seen him, his scales dull with stress, and his great eyes clouded with something that might have been guilt. "The situation is clear," he announced, his voice carrying easily across the chamber. "We face an unknown enemy with superior technology and unclear intentions. Our military advisors recommend immediate mobilization of all fleet assets." "Unknown enemy?" The voice came from the back of the chamber, young and angry. Captain Zix of the Border World stood up, her forearms gesturing wildly. "These aren't unknown enemies, Elder. These are humans, the species from every myth and legend our grandparents told us. The species that supposedly died out before any of us were born." "Myths and legends," Vorthak repeated firmly. "Nothing more." "Then explain their ships," shouted Commander Korval of the Industrial Worlds. "Explain how they know our languages, our history, our military formations. Explain how they appeared in 17 systems without using any hyperspace routes we can detect." The chamber erupted in arguments. Younger delegates demanded answers from their elders. Military representatives called for immediate attack. Scientists begged for more time to study the impossible technology they were seeing. Through it all, the oldest members of the council sat in silence. Ambassador Kayla noticed them first. The ethereals, whose energy forms flickered with nervous patterns. The ancient lithoids, whose rock-like faces showed expressions she had never seen before. The deep swimmers, who had refused to answer any questions since the human fleets appeared. And at the center of them all, the being that everyone called the Archivist. Nobody knew what species the Archivist belonged to. It was old beyond measure, a creature of metal and crystal and strange energies that had been present at the founding of the consortium. It rarely spoke, but when it did, Its words carried the weight of ultimate authority. Now it sat motionless, its crystalline eyes fixed on something only it could see. "Archivist," Elder Vorthak said, his voice suddenly respectful. "We require access to the deepest historical archives. These humans claim knowledge of events that predate all our records." The archivist's voice was like wind through broken glass. "Some knowledge is buried for good reason. The safety of the galaxy is at stake," Vorthak pressed. "If these beings pose a threat, the threat was ended long ago." The words came from an ethereal delegate, its energy form pulsing with colors that spoke of ancient pain. "We made sure of that." The chamber fell silent. Even the argument stopped as every being present turned to stare at the speaker. "What do you mean?" asked a young delegate from the mining worlds. The ethereal's form shifted, becoming more solid, more defined. When it spoke again, its voice carried the weight of 3 millennia. "We mean that some of us are old enough to remember the truth, old enough to remember the humans." "That's impossible," said Dr. Sinther, his large brain pulsing rapidly. "Humans are mythological. There's no evidence they ever existed. No evidence because we destroyed it all." Another voice joined the conversation. This time it was one of the ancient lithoids, its rocky form grinding as it moved. Every record, every artifact, every trace that they had ever lived. The silence in the chamber was complete now. Hundreds of beings stared at the oldest members of the council, trying to understand what they were hearing. "We had no choice," whispered a delegate from the deep worlds, its aquatic form trembling in its environmental suit. They were spreading, too fast, asking too many questions, uniting species that had been enemies for centuries. Ambassador Kayla found her voice. You're saying humans really existed? And you killed them all?" "Not all," the ethereal replied sadly. "We thought we had, but obviously some escaped. Some survived in places we couldn't find them. They've been out there all this time, growing stronger, planning their return." The revelation hit the chamber like a physical blow. Delegates began, shouting questions, accusations, demands for explanation. But through the chaos, Elder Vorthak's voice cut like a blade. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why would the founding species commit genocide against an entire civilization?" The archivist finally moved, its crystalline form rising from its seat. When it spoke, its words silenced every other voice in the chamber. Because they were everything we feared they would be. Because they were exactly what their legends claimed. They were unity in diversity, strength through cooperation, progress through understanding. They were what we could have become if we had been brave enough to follow their path. "I don't understand," said Captain Zix. "Humans didn't conquer through force," the archivist continued. "They conquered through friendship. Every species they met became their ally. Every world they visited became better than it was before. They shared technology freely, solved conflicts peacefully, and made enemies into friends with nothing more than patience and genuine care." "That sounds wonderful," said a delegate from the peaceful worlds. "Why was that dangerous?" "Because it threatened everything the galaxy's power structure was built on." The ethereal's form was dim now, flickering with shame. The founding species ruled through fear, through careful balance of power, through keeping other races dependent and divided. Humans offered a different way, a better way. "They were making us obsolete," added the lithoid. "Not through conquest, but through example. Species were abandoning their old alliances to join the human commonwealth. Trade agreements, defense pacts, cultural exchanges, all based on mutual benefit rather than dominance." The young delegates were horrified. The older ones looked sick. Ambassador Kayla felt as if her entire understanding of galactic history was crumbling around her. "So you decided to destroy them," she said. "We decided to preserve the existing order," corrected Elder Vorthak, though his voice was hollow. "The human expansion had to be stopped before it destabilized everything." "And now they're back," said Captain Zix quietly. "Now they're back, and they remember what you did to them." On the chamber's main screen, Admiral Chen's image appeared without warning. The human looked exactly as she had during the first contact, calm and composed. But now, knowing the truth, her expression seemed different, more dangerous. "People of the consortium," she said, her voice carrying easily through the chamber's speakers. "By now, your leaders have told you the truth about what happened to humanity, how your founders decided that genocide was preferable to sharing power, how 30 billion innocents died because we represented a threat to the established order." She paused, looking directly into the camera, as if she could see each delegate. "Individually, we want you to know that we don't hold the younger generations responsible for the crimes of their ancestors. You were raised on lies, taught false histories, given mythologies instead of truth. You are not guilty of our genocide." Relief flooded through the chamber, but Admiral Chen wasn't finished. "However, you are now responsible for what happens next. Your leaders have had 3,000 years to acknowledge their crime, to make amends, to honor the memory of our dead. Instead, they erased us completely, pretending we never existed at all." The image zoomed out, showing Admiral Chen standing before a massive holographic display. The display showed worlds, dozens of them, all bearing the blue and green colors of life-supporting planets. "These are the human worlds your founders destroyed," she said. 37 star systems, each one home to millions or billions of our people. Each one now claimed by consortium species who built their civilizations on the graves of ours. The chamber erupted again, but this time the anger was directed at their own leaders. Young delegates shouted accusations at older ones. Military officers demanded to know what weapons the humans possessed. Scientists begged for access to the suppressed historical records. "We still offer cooperation over conflict," Admiral Chen continued. "But we will not be erased a second time. We will not hide in the darkness while others profit from our stolen worlds. We will not allow the galaxy to forget what was done to us." The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in chaos. But through the noise and confusion, Ambassador Kayla heard something that chilled her more than anything else. It was the sound of the archivist laughing. A cold, crystalline sound that spoke of ancient secrets and terrible knowledge. "What's so funny?" she called out. The archivist turned its strange eyes toward her. "You think this is about revenge, young one. You think the humans have returned to punish us for past crimes, isn't it?" "No," the archivist said, its voice carrying a certainty that was somehow worse than any threat. "This is about justice, and humans, as their legends always claimed, are very good at justice." Outside the Great Dome, 6 months after the humans returned, the galaxy was unrecognizable. Admiral Thresia stood on the observation deck of her new flagship, watching the evacuation of New Sardinia. Below, millions of consortium citizens loaded their belongings onto transport ships, preparing to abandon the world their great-grandparents had settled 2 centuries ago. They moved with quiet dignity, but she could see the confusion and anger in their faces. They were leaving because New Sardinia had once been called Earth 7, a human colony world with a population of 4 billion. Now it was returning to its original owners. "Admiral," her aide approached carefully, "the last transport group is ready for departure. The human fleet is maintaining position at the system's edge." Thresia nodded without turning away from the window. In the distance, she could see them. Sleek human ships that waited with infinite patience as an entire world emptied itself of non-human life. They weren't threatening, weren't rushing the evacuation, weren't demanding anything beyond what had been agreed to in the Treaty of Remembrance. They were just there, watching, waiting, ensuring that justice was done. The Treaty of Remembrance. Even the name hurt to think about. It was the document that had ended the brief, devastating war between humanity and the consortium. A war that had lasted only 6 weeks but had changed everything about galactic civilization. The consortium forces had been vast, experienced, and confident. They commanded the loyalty of thousands of worlds and the military might of dozens of species. They had superior numbers, established supply lines, and 3,000 years of military experience. None of it had mattered. The humans hadn't just defeated the consortium military, they had destroyed its will to fight. Not through superior weapons, though their technology was centuries ahead of anything in consortium space. Not through tactical brilliance, though their battle strategies were unlike anything galactic military academies had ever taught. They had won through the power of truth. Every battle had been broadcast across the galaxy, not just the fighting but the conversations that came before and after. Human commanders speaking directly to consortium crews, telling them the real history of their civilization, showing them evidence of the great murder that their governments had hidden, revealing the lies that had shaped galactic politics for 3 millennia. Admiral Thressia remembered the moment when her own fleet had turned against her. She had been commanding a task force of 40 ships, preparing to engage a small human squadron near the Vega colonies. Her crews were confident, loyal, ready to fight for the consortium they had sworn to serve. Then Admiral Chen herself had appeared on every communication channel in the fleet, not to threaten or demand surrender, but to show them something impossible. "Captain Ulara of the destroyer Swift Justice," she had said, speaking directly to one of Thressia's subordinate commanders. "Your homeworld of Kelleran Prime was settled by refugees from the Kelleran Wars, wasn't it? Your people spent 2 centuries rebuilding after those conflicts destroyed your original civilization." "Yes," Captain Ulara had replied, confused but unwilling to be rude during what seemed to be a peaceful contact. "The wars that destroyed your world were funded by the consortium founders," Admiral Chen had continued. "They needed Kelleran Prime empty, so they could use it as a naval base during the human genocide. Your people were deliberately driven from their homes to serve someone else's military needs." Then she had shown them the evidence. Financial records from 3,000 years ago. Military communications discussing the Kelleran relocation project. Orders from the highest levels of consortium leadership authorizing the destruction of a peaceful civilization. Captain Ulara's world had been destroyed not by random tragedy but by deliberate policy. Her people had been made refugees to serve the genocide of another species. The reaction had been immediate and explosive. Captain Ulara had turned her guns on Admiral Thressia's flagship. Within hours, half the task force was in mutiny. Within days, entire consortium worlds were demanding answers from their governments. That scene had played out across the galaxy as humanity shared 3,000 years of suppressed evidence. Financial records, military communications, classified orders, personal diaries from the beings who had planned and executed the Great Murder. All of it preserved in human memory banks, all of it authenticated by the galaxy's own computer systems. The truth had spread faster than any military campaign could have stopped it. Species learned that their histories were lies, their governments were built on genocide, their civilizations were constructed on stolen graves. The consortium began tearing itself apart from within. The war had ended not with humanity's victory, but with the consortium's collapse. "Admiral," her aide's voice brought Thressia back to the present. "The evacuation is complete. The system is clear of all non-human populations." Through the observation window, she watched the first human ships approaching New Sardinia. They moved slowly, almost reverently, as if approaching something sacred, which she supposed they were. These were the first humans to set foot on one of their ancestral worlds in 3,000 years. "Signal the human fleet," she ordered. "Inform Admiral Chen that the transfer is complete. New Sardinia is returned to human control." "Understood, Admiral. Should we set course for the next evacuation zone?" Thressia nodded. 36 more worlds to go. 36 more planets where consortium species would pack their lives into cargo containers and leave their homes forever. It was justice, she supposed, but it felt like punishment all the same. Her communicator chimed with an incoming message. Admiral Chen's face appeared on the screen, looking exactly as composed as always. "Admiral Thressia, I wanted to personally thank you for your cooperation during the evacuation process. Your people have conducted themselves with honor throughout this transition." "Thank you, Admiral Chen. Though I have to ask, what happens to us now?" "The consortium is finished. Most of our governments have collapsed. Our people are scattered across refugee camps and temporary settlements. We're a civilization without a home. Admiral Chen's expression softened slightly. That depends on what you choose to become, Admiral. The Treaty of Remembrance guarantees the right of all species to exist peacefully within their own territories. Humanity has no interest in conquering or ruling over others. We never did. But the balance of power has shifted completely. You control the most advanced technology, the strongest military, the most accurate historical records. How do we know you won't become the tyrants your predecessors feared you would be? Because, Admiral Chen said simply, tyranny was never what made humans dangerous. What made us dangerous was our refusal to accept that the galaxy had to choose between oppression and chaos. We proved that cooperation was possible, that diversity was strength, that different species could work together for mutual benefit. She paused, and for the first time since the humans had returned, Thresia saw something other than calm certainty in her eyes. She saw hope. The old consortium was built on fear and lies. Admiral Chen continued. What comes next can be built on truth and trust. But that choice belongs to all of us, not just humanity. We can help, we can guide, we can share what we've learned during our exile. But we won't rule. We won't impose our will on others. We won't become what we fought against. And if someone decides they don't want to cooperate, if old hatreds and prejudices resurface, Admiral Chen's smile was sad but determined. Then we'll do what we've always done, Admiral. We'll try to make friends of our enemies. We'll try to find common ground. We'll try to prove that there's a better way. And if that doesn't work, then we'll remember that justice sometimes requires strength to defend it, but we'll never forget that our strength exists to protect, not to conquer. The communication ended, leaving Admiral Thresia alone with her thoughts. Outside, human ships were landing on New Sardinia's surface for the first time in 3,000 years. She wondered what they would find there. Empty cities built on the foundations of human settlements, monuments to the dead that no one had been allowed to remember, gardens planted over graveyards that had been forgotten by design. Her aide approached, again. Admiral, we're receiving communications from several former consortium worlds. They're requesting assistance with establishing new governments, new trade agreements, new defense pacts. With us? With humanity, Admiral. They want to join, whatever comes after the consortium. Thresia wasn't surprised. She had seen the same pattern emerging across the galaxy. Species that had been held back by consortium politics were suddenly free to advance. Worlds that had been kept dependent were learning to stand on their own. Civilizations that had been enemies for centuries were discovering they had more in common than they had ever imagined. The humans had kept their promise. They had returned not as conquerors, but as liberators. Not to dominate the galaxy, but to free it from the lies that had shaped it for 3 millennia. As her ship prepared to jump to hyperspace, Admiral Thresia took one last look at New Sardinia. Human cities were already beginning to rise from the empty settlements her people had left behind. But these weren't military installations or industrial complexes. They were homes, schools, parks, and gardens, places where human families could live and grow and remember those who had been lost.